It is important to keep in mind when calculating equilibrium price and quantity, equilibrium price is the price at which quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, and quantity equilibrium is the quantity sold when quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. The given functions are going to be the example in calculating equilibrium price and quantity. You have two functions, the demand function and the supply function. The demand function selected would be P of x equals 10 minus 2Q of x, and the supply function P of x equals 2 plus 2Q of x. Now the P of x would equal price and the Q of x would equal quantity. In order to solve the equation for equilibrium price and quantity, we must solve for the intersection, which would be the equilibrium. Now, I find it very useful to understand that the curved supply and demand are the actual supply and demand functions. P of x equals 2 plus 2Q of x is listed as the supply function, which would actually be the supply curve. P of x equals 10 minus 2Q of x is listed as the demand function, which is also the demand curve. Because the demand and supply curve are set at the equilibrium, you can now solve for finding the intersection by equaling the set of functions. Demand equals supply. So in accordance to that, you would have the two functions P of x equals 10 minus 2Q of x equals P of x equals 2 plus 2Q of x. That means that we would be solving for P of x, which would be the price. 10 minus 2Q of x equals 2 plus 2Q of x. Now that the two functions are set to equal, you will solve for Q of x, which would be the quantity. In order to solve for Q of x, you would do simple algebraic math, equaling 10 minus 2Q of x to 2 plus 2Q of x. Now that we have found the equilibrium price, 2Q of x equaling 2, it is time to find the price, P of x. In order to find the price, P of x, you would plug in the quantity amount, Q of x, into either function's demand or supply. Remember, quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. Therefore, you can use either of these functions to solve for P of x. For this specific example, I have chosen to solve P of x by plugging in P of x into the supply function. So, P of x equals 2 plus 2Q of x. So since we know Q of x equals 2, you would just plug in that within the equation. P of x equals 2 plus 2 times 2, which equals 6. Now, to further understand that the demand and supply functions equal each other, I'm going to assess the third step, which should be using the second function in order to find P of x, by plugging in Q of x simply into the second function. We have found the intersection, which would be the equilibrium, P equals 6, which would be price equals 6, and Q equals 2, which would be quantity equals 2. It is important to understand that in order to find the equilibrium price and quantity, that you must equal the demand function by the supply function, and then solve for Q of x, which would be the quantity, and then once you have solved for the quantity, you can then plug that back into either of the functions in order to solve for price. I hope this has further helped someone understand how to calculate the equilibrium price and quantity.